Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. It was recently announced by UFC President Dana White that the main event of UFC 296 will be Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington for the welterweight championship. And this is a fight that we have known has been in the works for the past 6 months or so, but it is finally official. It goes down on December 16th at UFC 296. And now that it is finally official, I want to discuss how this is one of the most undeserved title shots in UFC history. And this is just the UFC creeping down more and more that slippery slope of becoming more and more WWE-esque. And this fight disgusts me so much for so many reasons that I am hoping and praying to the MMA gods either Leon Edwards or Colby Covington pulls out of this fight. I do not want to see this welterweight title fight because I believe if Colby Covington wins this fight, I think the welterweight division will be absolutely ruined. We're going to discuss the future of the welterweight division if Colby Covington wins, and I hope I'm wrong. But also, I just want to discuss everything that's gone on leading up to this fight. And you have an inactive fighter in Colby Covington being rewarded for sitting out in witness protection with a welterweight title shot. We're going to discuss why I think that is. And also, I've made videos like this in the past because we really knew this fight was in the works since March earlier this year, 6 months ago. I made some videos back then discussing Colby Covington and why he's getting this title shot, or at least why I believe he's getting this title shot. And it never fails. In every video where I discussed it, I had people commenting, talking about Colby Covington's politics. So you guys know on this channel, I'm not scared to discuss any topic. So we're even going to briefly touch on those people who constantly mention Colby Covington's politics when it comes to him potentially earning a welterweight title shot. But let's look at Colby Covington's recent resume, because by the time Colby Covington steps in the cage at UFC 296, he will have been out for over a year and 9 months. The last time he fought was in March of 2022 against Jorge Masvidal. That is insanity. He has earned a title shot with a win over the dead body of Jorge Masvidal, and then he sat out for a year and 9 months to get a welterweight title shot. And then just to add insult to injury, oh, maybe Colby Covington's on a long winning streak. No, he's not. He's 2-2 in his last 4. He is 2-2 in his last 4, and his only wins are against Jorge Masvidal and Tyron Woodley. Talk about 2 of the worst wins you could possibly have in the welterweight division. His 2 losses, might you ask, were title fights. He already had title opportunities against Kamaru Usman. In one of those fights, he got stopped via TKO. In the other fight, he lost a decision. And people always bring up, when defending Colby Covington getting a title shot, they say, well, he had really close competitive fights with Kamaru Usman. Colby Covington's biggest accolade is literally losing to Kamaru Usman. And I've talked about this countless times over the years, that we have to stop elevating guys off of losses. I've seen it happen time and time again. A lot of people elevated Alexander Gustafsson off of a loss to John Jones at UFC 165, and he never really lived up to that hype. He was a good fighter, but he never really lived up to that hype. You have Dominic Reyes getting elevated off of a loss to John Jones that a lot of people thought was a win. To be fair, it was a very close fight, and a lot of people believe that Reyes won that fight, but they elevated him off of one fight and a loss at that, and look where he ended up. And Colby Covington's title shot has been consistently justified off of a loss to Kamaru Usman, 2 losses to Kamaru Usman. That is his biggest achievement in his UFC career. And if you look over his entire UFC resume, he has no wins over a fighter currently in the top 15 of the welterweight division. And he actually only has 3 wins against fighters on the UFC roster. And that's RDA, which I think is his best career win, which is going all the way back to 2018. Brian Barberino, which are going all the way back to 2016, and Max Griffin, which you go all the way back to 2016 as well. So he has 3 wins over fighters who are currently on the UFC roster, and then on top of that, no wins against current top 15 ranked welterweights, and he's 2-2 in his last 4 fights. that's deserving of a title shot. And you may ask, oh, well, maybe nobody else is deserving. Because if nobody else is deserving, okay, Colby Covington's a good fighter. Let's give him a title shot. Oh, you look at the entire division, there's multiple fighters you could give a title shot over Colby Covington. Belal Muhammad's on a 9-fight win streak, and the last 4 opponents that he beat are all still ranked currently in the top 10 of the welterweight division. Oh, you don't want to give it to Belal Muhammad because he fought Leon Edwards and got eye-poked in the past 2 years ago, 3 years ago now? Oh, Shavkat Rakhmonov, 17-0, all 17 finishes, coming off a stoppage win over top 10 ranked welterweight Jeff Neal. So you could give either one of those guys a title shot, but instead we're giving Colby Covington a title shot, which I didn't hate it when there was speculation that it might happen in July. I thought it was super undeserving, but what made it okay was, okay, it's going to happen really fast. It's going to be over and done with. It's not going to hold up the division. But as time progressed and 2 months turned into 6 months, and now 6 months turned into 9 months, so we're getting 9 months between Leon Edwards fighting Kamaru Usman at UFC 286 back in March, and now he's waiting all the way till December to fight Colby Covington, the most undeserving title contender in the entire welterweight division. It drives me nuts because now we're holding up the division that has a lot of fresh contenders making their way up the ranks. Shavkat, Belal, you have JDM making his way up the ranks. You have Ian Gary making his way up the ranks. Jeff Neal, I know he's kind of on a losing streak right now, but he's kind of, sitting around. People think, oh, maybe Jeff Neal could be a contender. Maybe he could be in the title picture. There's a lot of guys there that could make a run at the welterweight title who are actually fighting guys, and I know the welterweight division has been stagnant for a while. You have Wonderboy refusing to fight anyone, but nonetheless, we have a stacked welterweight division, and it just seems like it's just stuck in perpetuity. It's just nobody's fighting anyone, and there's a log jam at the top, especially now that you got Leon Edwards as champion, because he didn't want to fight Colby Covington to begin with. He didn't think Colby Covington deserved it, but he doesn't really have a say in it because it's not like Leon's some big draw or something that the UFC is going to listen to. Leon Edwards is going to do what the UFC tells him to do. But we waited 9 months to give a guy an undeserved title shot. And on top of that, the fact that Colby Covington sat out in witness protection for well over a year, coming up on 2 years by the time the fight actually happens. He ducked Khamzat Chimaev countless times. And I know people are going to say in the comments, they're going to regurgitate what Colby Covington has said, that Khamzat has ran from him. I'll tell you all you need to know about what happened between Colby Covington and Khamzat Chimaev. Khamzat Chimaev was super vocal about wanting the Colby Covington fight. Dana White was super vocal about wanting to book Colby Covington versus Khamzat Chimaev. And guess who was radio silent? Guess who never said a word? Colby Covington. The second that Khamzat Chimaev committed to moving up to middleweight, the second that Khamzat Chimaev had a fight booked with Paulo Costa, all of a sudden, Colby Covington saying, oh, Khamzat Chimaev ran from me. He didn't want to fight me. He ducked me. The second that Khamzat Chimaev committed to moving up to 185. And I just think Colby Covington, you go back in time, and we don't know all the behind-the-scenes details, but Colby Covington has been known for turning down fights. There was talk where they were going to book Colby Covington versus Belal Muhammad at that UFC 286 card. Now, I'm not saying for sure that Colby Covington was offered that fight, but you go back to the Woodley fight from years ago when Woodley was the champion. The reason the UFC stripped him of the interim belt and gave Kamaru Usman a title shot against Tyron Woodley is because Colby Covington was turning down fights. We have a history of that. And now he's turned down fights. He's ducked certain contenders. And to be honest, I prefer Colby Covington versus Khamzat Chimaev over Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington. I think that's a much bigger fight in general, and I'm actually disgusted that we never got to see that. But he ducked all these guys, he sat out in witness protection, and now he's being rewarded with a title shot. And I see a lot of people say and defend Colby Covington, and they say, well, Colby Covington's a draw, and that's why he's getting a title shot, because he's a draw. The word draw has been perverted by the MMA community over the last 3 to 4 years, where basically anybody that gets any attention on social media has all of a sudden become a draw. And it's just factually incorrect. There is no evidence to support that Colby Covington is a draw. Matter of fact, when he fought Jorge Masvidal, who's a bigger draw than him back at UFC 272 in March of 2022, that pay-per-view sold under 400,000 pay-per-view buys. Now, I don't know what your definition of a draw is, but that's not my definition of a draw. Just because Colby Covington gets attention on social media does not mean he's a draw. And I've talked about this in the past, and I've laid out all the evidence of why Colby Covington is not a proven draw. And I hear people say time and time again that, oh, Colby's a draw. He's got this personality and he's so fun and he has all these great lines. Colby is one of the corniest trash talkers I have ever heard. He's such a fake character, and it's almost like he's paying hobos on the side of the road to write him corny lines that then he then stumbles over at press conferences. For me personally, I don't enjoy it at all. It's just WWE-esque, and he wouldn't even make the WWE. The WWE wouldn't sign him. They'd be like, dude, you're not even good. You're not even good at, quote-unquote, cutting a promo. You're not even good at that. And I discussed this in the past, and I made a video talking about how I thought Belal Muhammad was a bigger draw in Abu Dhabi, and some people jumped on that and said, oh, you said Belal Muhammad's a bigger draw than Colby Covington. I said in the past, I thought if they did Leon Edwards versus Belal Muhammad in Abu Dhabi at UFC 294, because there was talk of that when Leon Edwards was saying, I want to fight in Abu Dhabi, I want to fight at UFC 294. There was some discussion of that. I said if Belal fights him at UFC 294, Belal Muhammad will be a bigger draw for the Abu Dhabi crowd. That's what I said before. So I know somebody's going to jump in the comments and say that. And there is just no evidence to support Colby Covington being a substantial pay-per-view draw. If anything, he's maybe just like barely scratching the surface of above average fighter in terms of drawing pay-per-views. Because Charles Oliveira is like a low-level draw who, if he continues to win, soon he might be like a mid-tier star like Israel Adesanya, somewhere along there. But Charles Oliveira is drawing more pay-per-view buys than Colby Covington, and he's a low-level draw. So that's all you really need to know about that. And I'm just so tired of people saying that's why he's getting a title shot, because that's just not true. Now, why I believe that Colby Covington is getting a title shot, and I've said this countless times, I believe that Kamaru Usman was close to pulling out of UFC 286 with an injury. I think that Kamaru Usman was very, very close to pulling out of that fight. And that's why the UFC flew Colby out last minute notice to weigh in, because if the main event for that UFC, that UK pay-per-view card, if that main event fell out, the card was just a disaster because it wasn't a stacked pay-per-view card. So if you lost Kamaru Usman and you lost that welterweight title fight, the card was just a disaster. It was no longer a pay-per-view. And on top of that, the UFC would have to refund tickets. So I think the UFC had a fear that Kamaru Usman was going to pull out of that card because maybe behind the scenes they knew about some injury or something along those lines. They called Colby Covington up. He said, I'll be there and I will make weight. And he showed up and he made weight. And I believe that's why the UFC is giving him a title shot, because everything else is just completely unjustified. And when I discuss how unjustified this is, I keep hearing one common thing. I get in the comments all the time. Oh, you don't like Colby because of his politics. You don't like Colby because of his politics. That couldn't be more further from the truth. That is just, I don't even think about something like that. We're going to talk about that more in a second. But to be honest, the reason I don't want to see Colby Covington get a title shot against Leon Edwards, and the reason I'm hoping that Leon Edwards pulls out or Colby Covington pulls out, is because I don't want to live in a world where Colby Covington wins the welterweight title and then refuses to defend it against contenders. I see a world where Colby Covington potentially wins that welterweight title and then refuses to fight any contenders. He's begging for a Conor McGregor fight. He's begging for a Nick Diaz fight. He's begging for Jorge Masvidal to come back and they're going to settle the beef because of the sucker punch. That's a world that I imagine. If you were to tell me right now, if Colby Covington wins the welterweight title and he defends it 3 times in 2024, or he has 3 title fights in 2024, I would want Colby Covington to win. That's the only thing I really care about when it comes to the welterweight title. I just want to see some activity. I'm tired of the welterweight division just stagnating. So a world where Colby Covington wins this fight, and people confuse when I say Colby Covington's an undeserved contender. They confuse it with saying, they think I'm saying that Colby Covington's not a good fighter. Colby Covington's a very good fighter. I think Colby Covington can even beat Leon Edwards. I did an early prediction for this fight yesterday. I'll link that video down in the description. If you think that I'm saying Colby Covington isn't a good fighter, I highly implore you to go check out that video. But my fear is if he wins the belt, he's going to duck every possible contender. He's going to duck Belal Muhammad. He's going to duck Shavkat Rakhmonov. And going back to me wanting one of these fighters to pull out, I don't want one of them to pull out and then not have a main event. But what I'm hoping for is if one of them pulls out, Shavkat Rakhmonov or Belal Muhammad steps in. To be honest, for me personally, you'll have to let me know which one of these fights would you genuinely prefer of all the potential outcomes. I'm not going to name every single one of them, but imagine a world where we get Colby Covington versus Shavkat Rakhmonov. Imagine a world where we get Leon Edwards versus Shavkat Rakhmonov, or we get Colby Covington versus Belal Muhammad. I prefer all those fights over Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington. I think they're all much better fights. I would, if I could have my choice right now, the most deserving fight is Leon Edwards versus Belal Muhammad too. But for me, I really, really want Leon Edwards versus Shavkat Rakhmonov. But if I had to choose, I'd pick the Belal Muhammad fight just because based on merit, he deserves that title fight. And he's gotten better and he's been super active, and I think he will be an active champion. So therefore, I want to see him in a title fight. So I really hope, honestly, this fight falls through. But not if we don't have an adequate replacement. If we don't have an adequate replacement, I want the fight to stay intact. So don't get that confused at all. But I know there's going to be somebody down in the comments saying, you just hate Colby and you're just saying all this stuff because of his political beliefs. And that could not be further from the truth. I do not care about any UFC fighters' political affiliation at all. And honestly, we all know that Colby Covington is playing a character. And there is a lot of MMA fans who are obsessed with politics in general. For me personally, I don't really follow political stuff. I don't really care about politics. And I damn sure don't care about another grown man that I've never met's politics. I don't care about his politics. For me, there's either deserving it or not deserving it. And for me, Colby Covington getting this title shot, as I laid out all the facts and all the other deserving contenders, he just flat out doesn't deserve it on merit. 2-2 in his last 4 fights, losing 2 title fights, hasn't fought in over a year and a half. It'll be a year and 9 months by the time he actually fights. And the fact that he's ducked other fights that could have been potentially #1 contender fights. He does not deserve it, especially when you have other deserving contenders like Belal Muhammad and like Shavkat Rakhmonov. I don't care what his political feelings are by any means. And I'm not even sure that he believes all the political stuff that he says. He's pandering to a certain fan base because he knows a lot of MMA fans are obsessed with politics. So you have Colby Covington, who before he was kind of forgettable. He doesn't have the most exciting style. All he does is go out there and just grind you to a decision and wrestle you and take you down. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I think Colby Covington's a boring fighter, because I don't think he's a boring fighter. But based on a lot of other fans' standards, Colby Covington is a boring fighter based on his style. There's a lot of fight fans who don't like grappling, don't like wrestling heavy styles, especially when they're not really getting finishes. And so Colby Covington has latched on to this character where he plays into the political landscape for attention. That's all he's doing here. And I don't care about it at all, but I just know somebody's going to comment that down below. But the fact remains, there is no doubt in my mind, based on merit, based on everything I've laid out, that Colby Covington does not deserve a title shot. And to be honest, he's not the only one. And I've talked about this countless times, and I think this is even worse. You have John Jones versus Stipe Miocic, which is the main event of UFC 295. I think Stipe Miocic is less deserving of a title shot than Colby Covington. And that's crazy to even say. But you have Stipe Miocic, who last time out, he was impersonating a lawn chair and he got brutally KO'd, and that was 2.5 years ago. And he's returning to get a title shot. That's just an embarrassment for the heavyweight title and the heavyweight division as a whole as well. And I've just talked about this countless times. I hate seeing undeserved title shots, especially when you have other deserving contenders. In the heavyweight division, you have Sergey Pavlovich, much more deserving of a heavyweight title shot than Stipe Miocic, who's been answering calls at the fire department for the last 3 years. So this has nothing to do with anything else. I don't enjoy Colby's personality. I don't enjoy his character at all, but I don't care about all that in terms of him getting a title shot. If he is the most deserving contender based on his resume, I want him to get a title shot. But in this particular case, when you look at the landscape of the division, he could not be further from a title shot right now based on merit. And I know that's not the way the UFC works, but I don't want to see the UFC just slowly continue to go down that slippery slope of becoming WWE-esque and just handing out title shots based on social media analytics. Like, oh, Colby got a lot of likes on Instagram, let's give him a title shot now. I'm so tired of hearing that. Colby Covington is literally the male version of Juliana Pena. He just screams out, you know, embarrassing, cringy, corny lines, act like people scared of him, act like people are paying to see him fight. And then on top of that, he doesn't even deserve it. At least Juliana Pena has a win over Amanda Nunes, so she's up there. Colby Covington is the power slap of the welterweight division, where people act like these social media analytics and the fact that people are, you know, looking at his Instagram post and looking at his YouTube interviews and they're getting good numbers. They act like that warrants a title shot. What world are we living in? 5, 6 years ago, if you would have said, oh, I want this guy to get a title shot because of, you know, his social media analytics, that would have been laughed out of the room. I just hate that people even suggest that. He does not deserve a title shot in any universe, in any realm, in any capacity. And I'm tired of seeing the UFC give out undeserved title shots. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And thank you so much for watching.